The air didn't just smell of smoke. It tasted of ancient things dying. It was a thick, cloying grit that coated the back of the throat and settled deep in the lungs. A cocktail of pine resin, scorched earth, and the metallic tang of ozone. For Captain Lucas Thorne, it was a taste he had known for 20 years. But today, in the heart of the Blackwood National Forest, it tasted wrong. Tasted like a lie. Lucas stood at the edge of Ridge 4, his boots sinking into a carpet of needles that were already gray and brittle, drained of life by a 3-month drought that had turned the Pacific Northwest into a husk. Around him, the world was ending in shades of orange and black. The roar was the first thing that broke new recruits. The sound of a wildfire wasn't a crackle. It was the thunderous, localized scream of a freight train derailment that never stopped. It was a sonic pressure that vibrated in the teeth and rattled the ribcage. "Captain, the wind is shifting again. It's backing on us." The voice crackled through his earpiece, distorted by static and fear. It was Jimmy, the rookie of Hotshot Crew 7. The kid was 22, strong as an ox, but he had eyes that were currently wide with the primal terror that comes when nature stops following the rules. Lucas keyed his radio, his hand gloved in heavy leather, black with soot. "Hold the line, 7. Keep the brake clear. It's just the canyon draft." But Lucas knew it wasn't just the canyon draft. He narrowed his eyes, peering through the shimmering heat waves that distorted the horizon. He wiped a mixture of sweat and ash from his forehead, leaving a streak of grime across his brow. The heat was oppressive, physical, a heavy blanket pressed against his turnout gear. The thermometer on his pack read 108 degrees Fahrenheit, but near the fire line, it was pushing 800. He watched the behavior of the flames. Fire was a beast, yes, but it was a beast of instinct. It ate where the fuel was dry. It moved where the wind pushed it. It climbed slopes because heat rose. It had a logic, a physics-based predictability that Lucas had spent a lifetime mastering. He could look at a topographic map and a weather report and tell you exactly where the fire would be in 4 hours. But the Blackwood fire was mocking him. It was jumping, not spotting where embers fly ahead and start small fires, but genuinely jumping, erupting in full-force conflagrations in areas that should have been relatively safe. It was moving against the prevailing wind. It was skipping over natural fuel breaks like they didn't exist. "Miller," Lucas barked into the radio, addressing his second-in-command. "Give me a sit rep on the western flank. Is the dozer line holding?" "Negative, Cap." Miller's voice came back, breathless. "It jumped the dozer line. It appeared on the other side, Lucas. I've never seen anything like it. It's encircling us." Lucas felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach, a chill that had nothing to do with the external temperature. He turned a slow 360. To the north, a wall of flame consumed a stand of Douglas firs, the trees exploding like Roman candles as the sap boiled instantly inside the bark. To the east, the smoke was a bruised purple, dense and impenetrable. To the south, their escape route, the fire was behaving erratically, fingering out in long, thin tendrils that looked less like a natural spread and more like a fuse burning toward a charge. They were being herded. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The fire wasn't just burning. It was shaping the battlefield. It was cutting off the exits, funneling Crew 7 toward the center of the valley, the old growth preservation, the sanctuary of 500-year-old redwoods that had stood since before the country was born. This was the specific parcel of land that Verdia Estate had been lobbying to declassify for a decade. If the trees died, the protection status vanished. If the protection vanished, the bulldozers moved in. "All units," Lucas said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the bedrock his team needed. "Abandon the line. Initiate Protocol Delta. We are pulling back to the LZ at the summit. Move, now." He watched his team scramble. They were exhausted, their yellow shirts stained black, their movements heavy and sluggish. They dragged their Pulaskis and chainsaws, retreating from the monster they had come to kill. Lucas stayed back, the captain's burden. He had to count them out. 1, 2, 3. He watched Jimmy stumble over a root, pick himself up, and keep running. Lucas turned to follow, but something caught his eye. Down in the ravine, About 50 yards from the fire's leading edge, a flash of light cut through the gloom. It wasn't the warm, organic glow of burning cellulose. It was a harsh, blinding white starlight, violent and chemical. It flared for a second, illuminating the underbelly of the smoke clouds with a spectral brilliance, and then vanished, replaced by a sudden, intense eruption of flame that turned the surrounding brush to ash in seconds. Magnesium. Lucas stopped. His brain screamed at him to run, to follow his crew, to get to the extraction point. Every second he wasted was a gamble with his life. But the detective in him, the man who believed in the sanctity of the forest more than he believed in God, froze his feet. Nature doesn't burn white. Lightning doesn't burn white. Go on without me. Lucas whispered to no one. He tapped his radio. Miller, get them to the chopper. I'm right behind you. I just need to check the flank. Cap, don't be a hero, Miller warned. The heat index is spiking. I'm moving. Lucas lied. He turned and slid down the embankment, sliding on the loose shale and ash. The heat intensified immediately. It felt like walking into an open oven door. The air was so hot it scorched the inside of his nose. He pulled his rebreather mask up, the rubber sealing tight against his face, transforming his breathing into a rhythmic, mechanical rasp. He moved toward where he had seen the flash. The fire was close now, a wall of rushing energy on his left. He could hear the sap popping, the terrifying whoosh of oxygen being sucked into the vacuum of the blaze. He reached the base of a massive oak tree, its canopy already beginning to singe. The ground here was scorched black, but in the center of the blackened circle, there was something that hadn't turned to ash. Lucas knelt, ignoring the screaming protests of his knees. He brushed away a layer of hot gray powder. It was a metal casing. It was twisted, warped by incredible heat, but it was unmistakable. It looked like a brutalist sculpture, a jagged lump of titanium and steel about the size of a brick. A natural fire would have barely warmed it, but this thing had been the source of heat. The metal was discolored, blooming with blues and purples from thermal stress. Lucas pulled a heavy thermal glove off his right hand, risking a burn to get a tactile sense of it. He reached into his belt pouch and pulled out a multi-tool, using the pliers to pry at the casing. It gave way with a screech of metal on metal. Inside, protected by the heat shield, was the smoking gun. It wasn't a gun, of course. It was a circuit board, melted, fused, but clearly technological. And next to it, stamped into the titanium baseplate that had survived the magnesium flare, was a serial number and a logo. A stylized V intertwined with a lightning bolt. Vane Dynamics. Lucas stared at it, the world around him slowing down. Vane Dynamics was a defense contractor, a subsidiary of the conglomerate building the high-rises in downtown Portland. They specialized in drone tech and advanced munitions. You sons of bitches, Lucas hissed behind his mask. You didn't just light a match. You bombed it. This was an incendiary device. A remote-detonated, chemical firestarter designed to mimic a natural ignition while burning hot enough to ensure nothing survived. The triangulation, the wind-defying spread, it was all orchestrated. A controlled demolition of an ecosystem. He had to take it. He had to get this out. He grabbed the device. Even through his remaining glove, the heat was searing. He shoved it into his fire-resistant pouch, securing the Velcro flap. The weight of it against his hip felt like an anchor, but it was the most valuable thing in the forest. Crack. The sound was louder than the fire. It was the sound of structural failure on a massive scale. Lucas looked up. The giant oak tree above him, its roots eaten away by the subterranean fire that the device had triggered, was tilting. It wasn't falling fast. It was dying in slow motion, a groaning, creaking descent. He tried to pivot, to launch himself backward, but the shale under his boots gave way. He slipped, falling hard onto his side. The ground rushed up to meet him, and then the sky went dark. The trunk of the oak didn't hit him directly. If it had, he would have been paced. But the heavy, burning canopy crashed down around him, a cage of fire and wood. A thick branch, heavy as a railroad tie, slammed into the earth inches from his head. while another pinned his left leg to the ground. Pain, white and sharp, shot up his thigh. Lucas screamed, the sound lost in the roar of the fire. He was trapped. The heat was rising instantly. The fire was closing the circle. Mayday! Mayday! He fumbled for his radio, his fingers shaking. Captain Thorne is down. Grid for Alpha. I am pinned. Static. Just empty, hissing static. He looked at his radio. The antenna had snapped off in the fall. He was alone, in the middle of a blast furnace, with the evidence that could bring down an empire burning a hole in his pocket. Lucas gritted his teeth, tears of smoke and pain streaming down his face. He grabbed the branch on his leg. It was burning. The bark was glowing red. He could smell his own turnout gear beginning to smolder. Not today, he growled, a primal sound that came from the deepest part of his gut. Not for them. He pushed. He pushed with every ounce of strength 20 years of hauling hoses had given him. He pushed until the veins in his neck bulged and his vision swam with black spots. The branch shifted an inch, then two. With a roar of effort, he yanked his leg free. The pain was blinding, likely a fracture, maybe a tear, but the adrenaline cocktail flooding his system masked the worst of it. He scrambled backward, crab walking away from the burning prison of the fallen tree. He stood up, putting weight on the bad leg. It buckled but held. He was limping, battered, and disoriented. He looked up toward the ridge where the helicopter was supposed to be. Through a break in the smoke, he saw the aircraft. But it wasn't lowering a basket. It was banking away. And down on the logging road, where the extraction vehicles should have been waiting, he saw the glint of black SUVs. They weren't Forest Service vehicles. Lucas realized then that the silence on the radio might not have been just a broken antenna. They knew. Someone knew he was down here. And they weren't sending help. They were sending a cleanup crew. He touched the pouch at his hip. He wasn't a rescue target anymore. He was a loose end. Lucas turned his back on the ridge, on the easy way out, and looked into the heart of the burning forest. The only way to survive was to go where no one else would dare follow. He had to go through the fire. He took a breath of the superheated air, tightened the strap of his helmet, and limped into the orange haze, disappearing into the inferno just as the first black-clad figure appeared on the ridgeline above him. The world inside the fire was not orange, as people assumed from the safety of their television screens. It was a shifting, violent spectrum of color that defied the natural order. It was the deep, bruising purple of smoke choking the sun, the blinding white of consuming oxygen, and the bloody crimson of dying embers. For Captain Lucas Thorne, limping through the inferno, it was the color of hell. He had crossed the threshold. Behind him lay the green, the unburned forest where the mercenaries were waiting, their boots clean, their weapons drawn. Ahead of him lay the black, the devastated landscape where the fire had already fed and moved on, leaving behind a skeleton of the world. But between the two was the active fire front, a wall of heat so intense it felt like a physical barrier, a solid mass pushing against his chest. Lucas didn't run. You didn't run in a fire, not with a leg that felt like it was packed with broken glass. You moved with purpose. You moved with the rhythm of the beast. He kept his head low, breathing through the filtered hiss of his rebreather, the sound loud and rhythmic in his ears, like the respirator of a dying man. His eyes, stinging and watering despite his goggles, scanned the ground for stump holes, pits left by burned-out root systems that could swallow a man whole and cook him alive in the subterranean oven. He was moving deeper into the pocket of the fire, a suicidal maneuver to any observer, but a tactical necessity to a veteran smoke jumper. The mercenaries would have thermal imaging. In the cool air of the unburned forest, Lucas's body heat would light up like a flare on their screens. But in here, in this cauldron where the ambient temperature hovered near 400 degrees, he was invisible. He was just another ghost in the machine. His left leg screamed with every step. The adrenaline from the tree fall was fading, replaced by a cold, sickening throb. He needed to check the damage, but stopping now meant dying. He had to put distance between himself and the ridge. He had to become part of the ash. A sound cut through the roar of the wind. A high-pitched, mechanical whine that didn't belong to the forest. It wasn't the throaty rumble of a chainsaw or the chugging of a pump engine. It was distinct, insect-like. Lucas dropped. He didn't think. He just let gravity take him, collapsing into the lee of a massive, smoldering log. He pressed his face into the dirt, covering the back of his neck with his gloved hands. Above him, cutting through the thick smoke like a shark through murky water, a drone swept past. It was a sleek, matte-black quadcopter, outfitted with a sensor array that looked like a cluster of spider eyes. Vane Dynamics tech. It wasn't looking for hotspots. It was running a grid search. Lucas held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The drone hovered for a moment, its rotors kicking up a swirl of gray ash that coated Lucas's yellow Nomex shirt. Turned, its sensors sweeping over the log he hid behind. The heat of the smoldering would mask him. To the drone, the log was 500 degrees. Lucas was a cool 98. He was a shadow within a shadow. The drone whirred and moved on, disappearing into the gloom to the west. Lucas exhaled, a ragged sound. They weren't just securing the perimeter. They were hunting him. They knew he had the device. They knew he had the proof that could topple a billion-dollar empire and send powerful men to prison for life. They wouldn't stop until he was ash, indistinguishable from the thousands of acres of ruin around him. He forced himself up. He had to keep moving. The fire front was shifting north, pushed by the wind, leaving a desolate moonscape in its wake. This was the Black. It was an eerie, silent graveyard. The roar of the fire was distant now, a background rumble, replaced by the crack and pop of cooling timber. The ground was knee-deep in white ash, soft as snow but hot enough to melt the rubber soles of cheap boots. Lucas navigated by memory and instinct. He knew this forest. He had hiked these trails with his father when he was a boy, before the droughts, before the politics. He knew that 2 miles east, there was a limestone ravine that cut through the topography, a natural drainage ditch that might offer cover from the drones and a path toward the highway. But 2 miles on a shattered leg was a marathon. 30 minutes later, his body began to fail. The dehydration was setting in, a cramping seizing his muscles. He stumbled, catching himself on a scorched sapling that crumbled to dust in his grip. He fell to his knees, gasping. He needed to look at the leg. He rolled onto his back, wincing as the hot ground bit into his skin through the turnout gear. He pulled a knife from his belt and sliced open the pant leg of his yellow suit. The skin underneath was an ugly canvas of purple and black, the swelling pushing tight against the fabric. It wasn't broken, he could still move the toes, but the muscle was crushed, a severe contusion that was bleeding internally. "Walk it off, Thorne," he muttered, his voice raspy and dry. "Just walk it off." He reached into his pack and found his canteen. It was half full. The water was warm, tasting of plastic, but it was the best thing he had ever tasted. He took a small sip, swishing it around his mouth to clear the grit before swallowing. He couldn't chug it. He didn't know how long he would be out here. As he capped the canteen, he heard it again. Not the drone this time. Steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Heavy boots breaking through the crust of the ash. Lucas froze. He slowly turned his head. Through the drifting smoke, about 50 yards back the way he had come, a figure emerged. A man, clad in black tactical gear, wearing a full-face respirator and carrying a suppressed carbine. He wasn't moving like a firefighter. He was moving like a soldier, sweeping the weapon in tight arcs. He had a thermal monocular mounted on his helmet. Lucas realized his mistake. As the ground cooled in the wake of the fire, his body heat was becoming visible again. He was beginning to glow against the fading background radiation of the burnt forest. The hunter stopped. He adjusted his headset. He had seen something. Lucas looked around frantically. No cover, just skeletal trees and flat, ash-covered ground. If he ran, he'd be shot in the back. If he stayed, he'd be executed. He had no weapon, just his multi-tool and a small emergency flare gun with one shot. He looked at the ground. 10 feet to his left, the ash looked different. It was slightly depressed, a shallow bowl in the earth, a stump hole. An old cedar had burned out there, leaving a cavity underground where the roots used to be. The surface was just a crust of ash and char, hiding a pit that could be 5 feet deep and filled with live coals. It was a widowmaker. Lucas scrambled toward it, not away from it. He moved on his belly, keeping his profile low. He stopped just behind the depression, burying himself in the loose gray powder until only his eyes and the top of his head were visible. He lay perfectly still, his hand gripping the flare gun, though he knew at this range it was useless as a weapon. The hunter moved closer. He was cautious, professional. He scanned the area where Lucas had been a moment ago. He saw the disturbed ash. He raised his rifle. "I have a visual on the trail," the man said, his voice muffled but audible in the silence. "Target is wounded. Moving east." The man took a step forward, then another. He was walking a straight line toward Lucas's position. Lucas held his breath. He needed the man to take 3 more steps. Just 3. "Come on," Lucas thought, willing the universe to bend. "Come on, you corporate bastard. Step into my office." The hunter paused. He seemed to sense something was wrong. The silence of the woods was heavy, judgmental. He lowered his rifle slightly, looking down at the ground. He was standing right on the lip of the trap. He took the step. The crust gave way with a soft whump. The hunter didn't even have time to scream. One moment he was there, the next he dropped straight down into the earth. The ash cloud puffed up like a geyser. Then came the scream. It was a sound that scraped against the soul, high, terrified, and filled with the immediate realization of agony. The hunter had fallen waist-deep into a bed of superheated coals that had been smoldering underground for hours. The rifle clattered across the ground, sliding toward Lucas. Lucas didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, ignoring the pain in his leg, and grabbed the barrel of the weapon. The hunter was clawing at the edges of the pit, trying to pull himself out, his legs kicking frantically in the subterranean fire. His tactical gear was melting, fusing to his skin. Lucas stood over him. For a second, their eyes met through the hunter's goggles. Panic meeting cold, hard rage. "Help me!" the man shrieked, his voice breaking. "Pull me out." Lucas looked at the man, then at the rifle in his hands. He stripped the magazine, ejected the chambered round, and tossed the bolt into the darkness. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't them. He grabbed the man's tactical vest and heaved. It took everything he had, his back muscle straining, his injured leg trembling. He pulled the mercenary free of the pit, dragging him onto the solid, cooler ground. The man's legs were smoking, his boots ruined, the smell of burnt synthetic and flesh filling the air. He curled into a fetal ball, sobbing, incapacitated by the shock. Lucas knelt beside him, breathless. He patted the man down, finding a radio and a GPS tracker. He smashed the tracker with a rock. He kept the radio. "Tell me," Lucas whispered, leaning close to the man's ear. "Where is the extraction?" The man gasped, teeth chattering from shock. Highway 26. Blockade. Sheriff is with us." "Who gave the order?" "Vane. Sterling. They said no witnesses." Lucas stood up. He looked down at the broken man. "You're going to live," Lucas said grimly. "Consider that your severance package." He turned and limped away into the darkness, leaving the man moaning in the ashes. He had the intel. The highway was blocked. The police were compromised. He couldn't just walk out. He had to break out. The trek continued. The night stretched on, an eternity of pain and soot. The moon rose, a blood-red crescent hanging over the devastated peaks. Lucas moved like a zombie now, his consciousness narrowing down to a single imperative. Right foot, left foot, breathe. He hallucinated. He saw faces in the smoke. His ex-wife, his daughter, the men from his crew who had died in the Yarnell Hill fire years ago. They walked beside him, silent companions in the ash. He talked to them. He told them he was sorry. He told them he was bringing the truth home. By the time the sky began to gray with the false dawn, Lucas reached the tree line near the highway. He was at the top of a steep embankment overlooking the asphalt ribbon of Highway 26. He dropped to his stomach, pulling his binoculars, miraculously unbroken, from his pack. Below him, the road was closed. Flares burned on the tarmac. 3 sheriff's cruisers were parked diagonally across the lanes. But standing with the deputies were the men in black SUVs. They were drinking coffee, laughing, leaning against the hoods of their cars. They looked relaxed. They thought he was dead. They thought the fire had done their work for them. Lucas scanned the blockade. He couldn't fight them. He had no gun and he could barely stand. He needed a vehicle. His eyes drifted to the far end of the blockade. There was a Department of Forestry green pickup truck parked slightly away from the SUVs. A ranger was sitting in the driver's seat, seemingly asleep or maybe just keeping his distance from the mercenaries. Lucas knew that truck. It was a standard-issue Ford F-250 with a brush guard and a reinforced suspension. It was a tank. He checked the pouch at his hip. The titanium device was still there, heavy and cool now. The evidence. He checked the horizon. The sun was cresting the mountains, casting long, sharp shadows across the road. The wind was picking up again. He had one shot. Lucas slid down the embankment, keeping to the drainage ditch that ran parallel to the road. The tall, dry grass of the ditch hit him, but it crackled with every movement. He was 50 yards out. 40. 30. He could hear their voices now. Drone lost signal in Sector 4. Probably melted. He's toast. Literally. Let's pack it up before the press gets here. Lucas reached the culvert directly beneath the forestry truck. He waited for the sound of a passing gust of wind to mask his movement. Then he hauled himself up out of the ditch, keeping low behind the rear bumper of the pickup. He crawled to the driver's side door. It was unlocked. Standard procedure for active fire zones. He opened the door fast. The ranger, a young kid named Miller, no relation to his crew chief, jumped, his eyes widening as he saw the blackened, terrifying figure of Lucas Thorne standing there. "Don't," Lucas rasped, his hand clamping over the kid's mouth. "Do not make a sound, son." Miller stared at him, terrifying recognition dawning in his eyes. He saw the burns, the blood, the madness in Lucas's gaze. "Get out," Lucas whispered. "Now." Miller nodded frantically. He scrambled out of the passenger side, hands raised. Lucas vaulted into the driver's seat. The keys were in the ignition. He didn't look at the mercenaries. He didn't look at the cops. He turned the key. The V8 engine roared to life with a thunderous growl. The heads of the men at the blockade snapped toward him. The sheriff dropped his coffee cup. One of the mercenaries reached for his weapon. "Hey!" someone shouted. "Stop!" Lucas shifted into gear, stomped on the gas, and dropped the clutch. The tires screamed, spinning on the asphalt before biting down. The truck fishtailed, then straightened out, rocketing forward. He wasn't driving away from them. He was driving through them. The blockade was 50 feet away. The mercenaries raised their rifles. The first shots rang out, pop, 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 shattering the windshield into a spiderweb of diamonds. Lucas ducked low, steering by instinct. He aimed for the gap between 2 cruisers. "Hold on," he gritted out. Crash. The heavy brush guard of the F-250 slammed into the rear quarter panel of a sheriff's cruiser, spinning it around like a toy. Metal screeched, glass exploded, and the impact jarred Lucas's teeth, sending a fresh wave of agony through his leg. But he was through. He punched the accelerator to the floor. The truck surged forward, leaving the chaos behind. He checked the rearview mirror. The SUVs were scrambling, men jumping into vehicles. The chase was on. But Lucas had the lead and he had the rage. He grabbed the radio handset of the truck, tuning it to the emergency broadcast frequency. "This is Captain Lucas Thorne," he said, his voice steady despite the blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. "I am on Highway 26, heading west toward Portland. I have evidence of arson. I have evidence of murder. And if anyone tries to stop me, I will turn this highway into a war zone." He threw the handset down and gripped the wheel with white-knuckled hands. The city was an hour away. The press conference was at noon. He had survived the fire. Now he had to survive the world. The wind screaming through the shattered windshield didn't feel like air anymore. It felt like a solid object, a wall of pressure hammering against Lucas Thorne's face, forcing his eyes into a permanent squint. The speedometer of the stolen Ford F-250 was buried past 95 miles per hour, the heavy chassis shuddering violently as the suspension fought to keep the tires glued to the asphalt of Highway 26. Every vibration traveled up the steering column and drilled directly into his fractured leg. A rhythmic, agonizing pulse that had moved beyond pain into a sickening, white-hot nausea. Lucas gripped the wheel at 10 and 2. His knuckles bleached white under the grime of soot and dried blood. In the rearview mirror, or what was left of it, a spiderwebbed shard hanging by a wire, he saw them. 2 black SUVs, low to the ground, aggressive, moving in a tight formation like wolves cutting a bison from the herd. They were closing the gap. A crack, sharp and dry like a whip snap, echoed over the roar of the V8 engine. The passenger side wing mirror exploded in a shower of plastic and glass. "Keep shooting," Lucas growled, his voice lost in the wind tunnel of the cab. "You can't kill a ghost." He swerved hard to the left, cutting across the rumble strips and into the fast lane, forcing a silver sedan to veer onto the shoulder with a blare of horns. The F-250 was a tank, a tool of the Forest Service designed to haul water and timber, not to outrun high-performance tactical vehicles. But Lucas had something the mercenaries didn't. He had the weight, and he had absolutely nothing left to lose. The lead SUV surged forward, pulling up alongside his rear quarter panel. Lucas saw the window roll down. A barrel protruded. They weren't trying to stop him anymore. They were trying to put a bullet in his brain before he reached the city limits. The pretense of an accident was gone. This was an execution in broad daylight. Lucas waited. He watched the nose of the SUV inch forward, aligning with his rear axle. It was a pit maneuver setup. They wanted to spin him out, flip the truck, and end it in a fireball that could be blamed on a panicked fugitive driving recklessly. "Not today," Lucas whispered. Just as the SUV twitched to sideswipe him, Lucas slammed on the brakes. The heavy truck locked up, tires screaming, smoke billowing from the wheel wells. The SUV, anticipating forward momentum, shot past him, overshooting its mark. Lucas instantly floored the accelerator again, wrenching the wheel to the right. The heavy steel brush guard of the Ford clipped the rear bumper of the SUV. Physics took over. The lighter vehicle lost traction, its back end swinging out wildly. It spun across 3 lanes of traffic, tires screeching a eulogy, before slamming backward into the concrete median barrier with a bone-jarring crunch. One down. Lucas didn't celebrate. He didn't even blink. He focused on the second SUV, which had dropped back, learning from its partner's mistake. It settled into his slipstream, a dark shadow waiting for an opening. Ahead, the skyline of Portland rose from the haze, a cluster of glass and steel reflecting the gray, indifferent sky. To the commuters stuck in the morning gridlock, it was just another Tuesday. To Lucas, it looked like a fortress he had to breach. The intersection of the highway and the city was approaching the Vista Ridge Tunnel. It was a choke point. The radio on the seat beside him crackled. It was the emergency frequency he had broadcasted on earlier, but now a new voice cut through the static. "Suspect vehicle, this is Oregon State Police. Pull over immediately. We have authorized use of force. Pull over." Lucas grabbed the handset, keeping one hand on the bucking wheel. "I am not stopping. I have a biological hazard and active explosive evidence. Get the hell out of my way." He threw the mic down. They wouldn't believe him. The narrative had already been spun. Mayor Sterling and Vane Dynamics controlled the message. To the cops, Lucas was a rogue firefighter, likely suffering from PTSD, who had snapped and stolen a truck. To the world, he was dangerous. The tunnel mouth loomed, a gaping maw in the hillside. Traffic was heavy here, cars bumper to bumper, crawling toward the city center. Lucas didn't touch the brakes. He couldn't. If he slowed down, the SUV behind him would box him in, or the police units converging from the on-ramps would swarm him. He aimed for the shoulder. a narrow strip of concrete littered with debris. "Move!" he screamed. Though they couldn't hear him, the truck mounted the curb, the suspension groaning. He scrapped the tunnel wall, sparks showering from the passenger side like fireworks. A screeching banshee wail of metal grinding on concrete that echoed in the enclosed space. Commuters swerved, faces pressed against windows in shock as the battered green truck roared past them on the wrong side of the yellow line, followed closely by the black SUV. The tunnel was a strobe light of terror, the flashing lights of cars, the sparks, the darkness. Lucas felt the walls closing in. The heat from the floorboards was cooking his boots. The engine temperature gauge was redlining. The truck was dying. "Just a little further," he pleaded with the machine. "Get me to the river." He burst out of the tunnel and into the blinding daylight of the city. The Morrison Bridge lay ahead, crossing the Willamette River. On the other side was downtown, City Hall, the press conference. But the bridge was blocked. 3 police cruisers sat horizontally across the lanes, lights flashing. Behind them, standing with arms crossed, were men in suits. Not cops, private security. Vane's cleanup crew, coordinating with the local precinct. Lucas checked the mirror. The trailing SUV was still there, hanging back, herding him toward the blockade. They had him sandwiched, the hammer and the anvil. Lucas looked at the speedometer. 80. He looked at the blockade. Solid steel and police interceptors. He looked at the river. "Sorry about the truck," he muttered to the universe. He didn't aim for the blockade. He yanked the wheel hard to the right, aiming for the pedestrian ramp that spiraled down toward the waterfront park. It was a narrow concrete path designed for bicycles and strollers, not a 3-ton pickup truck. The truck smashed through the chain-link gate, the metal fencing wrapping around the hood like a shroud. The sudden drop stomach-churning. The tires left the ground. For a second, Lucas was flying. Then gravity reclaimed its debt. The truck slammed down onto the pedestrian path, the suspension bottoming out with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The airbag deployed, punching Lucas in the face with the force of a prizefighter, filling the cab with white powder and blocking his vision. He clawed the deflated bag away, gasping for air, blood streaming from his nose. He was moving, bouncing violently down the spiral ramp, scraping the concrete walls, taking out light poles and trash cans. The SUV didn't follow, couldn't make the turn. Lucas leveled out at the bottom, tearing across the manicured grass of the waterfront park. Families scattered. A flock of geese took flight in a panic. He was driving through a picnic, a monster of soot and twisted metal invading a peaceful afternoon. He swung the truck back onto the surface streets, tires bumping over the curb. He was 4 blocks from City Hall. The truck was limping now. The front left tire was shredded, flapping uselessly against the rim. The engine was smoking, a thick white plume trailing behind him like a flag of surrender. But he wasn't surrendering. He could see the building now. It was a grand, historic structure, surrounded by media vans with satellite dishes extended. A crowd had gathered outside, held back by velvet ropes and uniformed officers. They were there for the show. They were there to hear the mayor talk about resilience and rebuilding. Lucas turned the corner onto 4th Avenue. The truck lurched, dragging its belly on the asphalt. A police officer stepped into the street, hand raised, pistol drawn. Lucas didn't slow down, but he didn't aim for the officer either. He laid on the horn, a long, dying wail. The officer dove out of the way. Lucas aimed for the stairs. The wide stone steps leading up to the main entrance of City Hall were ceremonial, meant for dignitaries and parades. They were not meant for a Ford F-250. "Here comes the truth," Lucas gritted out. He floored it one last time. The truck hit the first step and launched upward. It was a violent, chaotic ascent. Metal sheared off. The oil pan cracked open, painting a black stripe up the granite. The truck crested the stairs, smashed through the wooden barricades of the press area, and slammed into the heavy oak doors of the main entrance. Boom! The impact stopped the world. The truck died instantly, steam hissing aggressively from the crushed radiator. The silence that followed was deafening. broken only by the tinkling of falling glass and the distant, rising wail of sirens. Inside the truck, Lucas hung limp in his seatbelt. His vision was graying out at the edges. His head swam. Every bone in his body felt pulverized. "Get up." The voice in his head was his father's. "Get up, Luke." He fumbled with the door handle. It was jammed. He slammed his shoulder against it. Once, twice. It groaned and popped open. Lucas fell out of the cab, hitting the cold stone of the City Hall portico. He gasped, sucking in the cool air. It smelled of exhaust and spilled coolant, but underneath that, it smelled of the city, clean, oblivious, expensive. He tried to stand, but his left leg collapsed. He screamed, a raw, animal sound, and dragged himself up using the truck's tire for support. He reached back into the cab, into the pouch at his hip. His fingers closed around the titanium device. It was still warm. He turned toward the shattered doors. Through the broken glass, he could see the lobby. Beyond that, the double doors to the main auditorium where the press conference was taking place. Security guards were running toward him, hands on their holsters. "Stay back," Lucas roared. He didn't recognize his own voice. It was deep, shredded by smoke. He held the device up high. "I have an explosive device. Stay back." It was a lie. The device was spent, but it froze them. In a post-9/11 world, the word explosive was a magic spell. The guards hesitated, seeking cover. Lucas used that second. He limped forward, dragging his ruined leg. He left a trail of ash and blood on the polished marble floor of the lobby. He looked like a creature from a nightmare, covered in black soot, his yellow jacket torn to ribbons, his face a mask of dried blood and white airbag powder. He reached the auditorium doors. He could hear the muffled voice of Mayor Sterling inside. "Tragic loss, but we must look forward. The Verdia project represents hope." Lucas didn't bother with the handles. He turned his body and threw his entire weight against the center of the double doors. They burst open. The light inside was blinding. Hundreds of camera flashes going off at once, television spotlights, the chandeliers. Lucas stumbled into the room. The sudden hush was physical. It started from the back, where the sound of the doors opening hit first, and rolled forward like a wave until it reached the podium. Mayor Sterling stopped mid-sentence. His mouth hung open. Next to him, Robert Vane, the CEO, looked up from his notes, his eyes narrowing in instant recognition. Lucas stood there, swaying. He was alone in a sea of suits. He was the wilderness crashing into the boardroom. He felt the eyes of the world on him, the cameras swiveling, the live feeds broadcasting his broken form to millions of living rooms. He wheezed, his lungs spasming. He looked at the reporters, then at the mayor, and finally locked eyes with Vane. The room was silent, waiting for the pin to drop. Lucas limped forward, step by agonizing step, until he reached the heavy mahogany table in front of the stage. He didn't look at the security guards rushing the stage from the wings. He didn't look at the police chief shouting orders. He looked at the camera with the red live tally light. He raised the twisted, charred lump of titanium. "They told you it was lightning," Lucas said. His voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the hall, it carried to the rafters. "They told you it was an act of God." He slammed the device onto the table. The sound echoed like a gavel. "God doesn't use magnesium timers," he said, his eyes burning with a fire that no water could put out. "This is a murder weapon." Robert Vane stood up, knocking his chair over. "Cut the feed," he shouted, his composure shattering. "Cut the damn feed." But it was too late. The signal was out. The truth was out. Lucas felt his legs give way. The adrenaline was gone. The pain was finally claiming him. He slumped against the table, sliding down to the floor, his hands still resting on the piece of metal that had cost so much to bring here. As the darkness finally took his vision, the last thing he saw was the chaotic flash of cameras, immortalizing the ashes of the truth. The world did not return with a bang, nor with the roar of fire. It returned in a slow, agonizing slide of white light and the rhythmic, synthetic beep of a machine that sounded like a countdown. Lucas Thorne floated in the space between consciousness and the void, a place where the air didn't smell of burning pine and melting rubber, but of antiseptic, floor wax, and the metallic tang of blood. He tried to move, a reflex born of 20 years of waking up to alarms, but his body refused the command. His left leg was a heavy, encased anchor, and his arms felt as though they were miles away, detached from his torso. He forced his eyes open. The light from the fluorescent tubes overhead stabbed into his retinas, sharp as needles. He blinked, tears streaming down his face, washing away the last gritty remnants of the blackwood ash. As his vision cleared, the blur resolved into the stark geometry of a hospital room. It was private, sterile, and cold, too cold. After the inferno, the air conditioning felt like an assault. He tried to lift his right hand to wipe his eyes, but metal chinked against metal. The sound was small, but in the silence of the room, it rang like a bell. Lucas turned his head, the muscles in his neck screaming in protest. His right wrist was cuffed to the steel rail of the hospital bed. The chain was short, giving him just enough slack to realize he was a prisoner, but not enough to forget it. "Easy, Captain. You've been out for 16 hours. The voice came from the corner of the room, from the shadows where the light didn't reach. A uniformed officer sat there, a magazine open on his lap, a styrofoam cup of coffee steaming on the small table beside him. It wasn't a sheriff's deputy. Lucas knew all of them, and most of them were currently on Vane's payroll. This was a Portland City cop, young, with a face that looked too soft for the job. "Water," Lucas rasped. The word was a ruin, a sound of grinding gravel. His throat felt like it had been scrubbed with steel wool. The officer hesitated, glancing at the door as if checking for permission, before standing up. He poured a plastic cup of water and brought it to the bedside, holding the straw to Lucas's lips. Lucas drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing the burns in his esophagus, but the humiliation of being nursed like an infant burned hotter than the fire. "Am I under arrest?" Lucas whispered, his voice gaining a fraction of strength. The officer pulled back the cup. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "You're in protective custody, sir. Pending a mental health evaluation and charges regarding the incident at City Hall." "Incident," Lucas repeated, a dry, humorless laugh escaping his lips. "Is that what they're calling it? You drove a truck through the front doors of the municipal building, Captain. You hospitalized 3 security guards and caused a panic. People thought it was a bomb." "It was a bomb," Lucas said, his eyes hardening. "It just went off in the woods, not the lobby." The officer didn't reply. He returned to his chair, retreating into the safety of silence. Lucas lay back, staring at the ceiling tiles. He took inventory of his body. His leg was in a cast, elevated. His ribs were taped. He could feel stitches pulling at his hairline. He was broken, battered, and chained, but he was alive. And if he was alive, that meant Vane had failed. But the silence was heavy. It was the silence of a narrative being rewritten. Lucas knew how this worked. While he lay here unconscious, the spin doctors would be working overtime. They would paint him as a hero who snapped, a man broken by the stress of the job, a paranoid arsonist seeking glory. They would bury the truth under a mountain of sympathy and psychiatric jargon. The door opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. 2 men walked in. They weren't doctors, and they certainly weren't family. They wore charcoal suits that cost more than Lucas made in a year. They carried briefcases and an air of predator-like confidence. The scent of expensive cologne washed over the smell of antiseptic. "Officer, could you give us a moment?" The taller of the 2 said. He had silver hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The young cop stood up immediately. "I have orders not to leave the suspect unattended. We are Mr. Vane's legal counsel," the silver-haired man said, producing a card that looked like a weapon. "We have an emergency injunction allowing us to depose the witness regarding the theft of corporate property. You can stand outside the glass." The cop looked at the card, then at Lucas, and finally nodded. He walked out, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving Lucas alone with the sharks. The lawyers approached the bed. The silver-haired man pulled up a chair, while his younger associate stood by the window, closing the blinds, blocking out the view of the city Lucas had tried to save. "Captain Thorne," the older man began, his voice smooth, baritone, practiced. "My name is Elias Thorne, no relation, I assume. I represent Verdia Estate and Vane Dynamics." Lucas stared at him. "Get out." Elias chuckled softly, opening his briefcase. "I understand your hostility. You've been through a traumatic event. Severe dehydration, smoke inhalation, a concussion. Medically speaking, you are in a state of delirium. It's quite common for firefighters in extreme conditions to hallucinate." "I didn't hallucinate the timer," Lucas said, his grip on the bed rail tightening until his knuckles turned white. "I didn't hallucinate the magnesium. The device you presented," Elias said, pulling a document from his case, "is a proprietary geological survey tool. Vane Dynamics uses them to map soil density for construction. They are harmless. Expensive, yes, but harmless. You stole it, Captain, and then you claimed it was a weapon." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The gaslighting had begun. They were going to claim the incendiary device was a glorified stud finder. "It had an igniter," Lucas spat. "It was burning at 3,000 degrees. Battery malfunction caused by the wildfire," Elias countered smoothly. "Tragic, but hardly a conspiracy. Look, Lucas. Can I call you Lucas? We don't want to ruin you. You're a decorated firefighter. A hero. The city needs heroes. It doesn't need a mentally unstable criminal who crashes trucks into government buildings." He slid a paper across the bedside table. It was a plea deal. "Sign this," Elias said. "Admit that you were suffering from acute stress reaction. Admit you were confused. Vane Dynamics will decline to press charges for the theft and the property damage. We will even cover your medical bills and a generous pension for your early retirement." "And the forest?" Lucas asked, looking at the paper. "What happens to Blackwood?" "The forest is gone, Lucas." The associate by the window spoke for the first time. "It's ash. You can't save it. But you can save yourself." Lucas looked at the pen Elias was holding out. It was a lifeline. He could sign it, go home, and drink himself to death in a cabin somewhere, safe and paid for. He could stop fighting. His body ached for the surrender. He looked at the handcuff. He looked at Elias's manicured fingernails. "Go to hell," Lucas whispered. Elias sighed, a sound of genuine disappointment. "I was afraid you'd say that. You know, the district attorney is a close friend of Mayor Sterling. If we go to trial, it won't be about the fire. It will be about your divorce, your history of alcohol use, that fight you got into at the bar last year. We will strip you naked in front of the world, Lucas. You will die in prison and everyone you love will watch." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Lucas knew they could do it. He was one man against $1 billion. "I'd rather die in prison," Lucas said, his voice steadying, "than live in your pocket." Elias's face hardened. The mask slipped. "Have it your way. Enjoy the cage, Captain." He stood up to leave, snapping his briefcase shut. The associate reached for the door handle, but the door opened before they could touch it. It didn't just open. It was shoved inward with force. A woman stood in the doorway. She was wearing a windbreaker with yellow bold lettering on the back, jeans, and boots that looked like they had seen dirt. She wasn't local. She had the hard, weary look of someone who chased monsters for a living. Behind her, the young police officer was trying to intervene. "Ma'am, you can't go in there. This is a restricted area." The woman ignored him. She stepped into the room, her eyes sweeping over the lawyers like they were insects. She held up a badge in a leather wallet. It wasn't a silver police shield. It was gold. "FBI," she announced. Her voice was raspier than the lawyers, but it carried 10 times the weight. "Special Agent Elena Rostova. Which one of you is Elias Thorne?" The lawyer blinked, caught off guard. I am currently in a privileged consultation with my CLI." "He's not your client," Rostova cut him off. She walked past him to the foot of Lucas's bed. She looked at Lucas, studying him for a second, assessing the damage. He's a federal witness. Elias bristled. On what grounds? This is a state matter. Property damage and reckless driving. Interstate commerce, Rostova said, turning to face the lawyer. She was smaller than him, but she loomed larger. Vane Dynamics is a defense contractor. The device Captain Thorne slammed onto that table? That falls under the purview of the ATF and the Department of Defense. We've taken custody of the evidence. The color drained from Elias's face. That device is proprietary. That device is a Class A incendiary prototype that was reported lost in a shipment to Afghanistan 3 months ago, Rostova said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. So, unless you want to explain to me why it was found in an Oregon state forest, I suggest you take your briefcase and get the hell out of my crime scene. The room was silent. The power dynamic had shifted so violently that Lucas could almost feel the air pressure change. Elias stared at her, his jaw tightening. He looked at Lucas one last time, a look of pure venom, and then nodded to his associate. We're leaving, but this isn't over, Agent. The Department of Justice answers to people higher than you. Let them call me, Rostova said dryly. The lawyers fled. Rostova waited until the door clicked shut. Then she turned to the young cop who was still hovering in the hallway, looking terrified. Officer, she said, nobody comes in this room unless I clear them. Not the doctor, not the nurse, and definitely not the mayor. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am, the cop squeaked. Rostova closed the door and locked it. She let out a long breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. She pulled a chair over to the bedside, sitting down heavily. She looked at Lucas. Up close, he saw the fatigue in her eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. You really kicked the hornet's nest, didn't you, Captain? She asked. Lucas looked at her badge, then at her face. You believe me? I saw the broadcast, Rostova said. I was in Seattle working a RICO case. I saw you walk into that room. A man doesn't destroy his life like that for a lie. Plus. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a grainy photo. It was a spectral analysis printout. I had a buddy at the lab run the serial number you shouted out on TV before the feed cut. It matches. Lucas let his head fall back against the pillow. A wave of relief washed over him, so powerful it almost made him pass out again. They said it was a geological tool. They're lying, Rostova said. It's a bomb, but proving they planted it. That's the hard part. Possession isn't intent. They're going to say you stole it and planted it yourself to save the forest from development. They're already spinning the narrative on the news channels. Hero firefighter suffers mental break. It's trending. I saw them, Lucas said. In the woods. Private security. They were hunting me. They had drones. Rostova leaned forward, pulling a small notepad from her pocket. Now we're getting somewhere. Tell me everything. From the moment you saw the flash. Am I still under arrest? Lucas asked, lifting his cuffed hand. Rostova looked at the cuff. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a universal key, and unlocked it. The metal clicked open, and Lucas rubbed his raw wrist. Technically, yes, Rostova said. But you're my prisoner now, and I don't lose my prisoners. She clicked her pen. Start talking, Lucas. We don't have much time. Vane's lawyers are going to make a call to DC. And someone is going to try to pull me off this case within the hour. I need enough to get a warrant for Vane's servers before that happens. Lucas took a breath. It hurt, but it was a good hurt. He began to speak. He told her about the triangular burn pattern, the white flash, the tree falling, the mercenaries in the black SUVs, the pit trap, the chase. Rostova wrote furiously, her shorthand a blur on the page. When he got to the part about the drone, she stopped him. You said it was a quadcopter? Matte black? Cluster sensors? Yeah. Why? Because those drones record everything? Rostova said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Video, thermal, telemetry, and Vane Dynamics keeps their data in the cloud for diagnostic purposes. Can you get it? If I can get a warrant based on your testimony, she said. If that drone footage shows them hunting a federal employee in a national forest, that's not just arson. That's attempted murder of a federal officer. That's domestic terrorism. She closed the notebook and stood up. The energy in the room had changed. It wasn't a hospital room anymore. It was a war room. I need to make a call, she said. I have a judge in the Ninth Circuit who owes me a favor.
Sit tight.
Don't eat anything they bring you. Don't drink anything unless it's sealed. Where are you going? Lucas asked, panic flaring slightly. To get your backup, she said. You have a crew, right? Hotshot Crew 7?
Yeah.
Jimmy, Miller. Are they okay? They're fine. They've been trying to get in to see you for hours. But the police blocked them. I'm gonna bring them in. We need witnesses who can corroborate the fire behavior before you found the device. She walked to the door, hand on the latch. She paused and looked back at him. You did good, Lucas. You lit the match. Now let me build the bonfire. She exited, leaving Lucas alone again. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was pregnant with possibility. He looked at his free hand. He flexed his fingers. He wasn't just a victim in a hospital bed. He was the star witness. And for the first time since the fire started, Lucas Thorne realized that the flames might finally be burning in the right direction. But outside, in the corridor, the elevator dinged. The doors opened, and a man stepped out. He wasn't a lawyer and he wasn't a cop. He was dressed in hospital scrubs, wearing a surgical mask, pushing a cart of medication. He kept his head down, moving methodically toward Lucas's room. Lucas watched the shadow of feet stop under the gap of his door. The handle turned slowly. Rostova had locked it. The handle jiggled. Then, a soft, metallic scratching sound. A lockpick. Lucas sat up, adrenaline flooding his system, overriding the pain. He looked around for a weapon. There was nothing but the plastic water pitcher and the 4-pole. He grabbed the 4-pole, ripping the tape from his arm, blood welling up where the needle tore out. He gripped the steel pole like a spear. The lock clicked. The door opened inches. Come on, Lucas whispered, his eyes blazing. Come and get it. The lock cylinder turned with a wet, lubricated click that sounded like a bone snapping in the heavy silence of the hospital room. Lucas Thorne didn't breathe. He held the oxygen in his lungs, turning it into fuel, his grip on the steel shaft of the 4-pole tightening until the metal bit into his palms. The door drifted open, revealing a sliver of the hallway's fluorescent purgatory before a figure slipped inside. The intruder moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, the rubber soles of his shoes making no sound against the linoleum. He was dressed in standard-issue surgical scrubs, a generic shade of teal that rendered him invisible in a medical facility, his face obscured by a pleated mask and a surgical cap. To anyone passing by, he was a nurse on rounds. To Lucas, he was the Reaper. The door clicked shut, sealing the room. The intruder turned, and for a split second, the eyes above the mask met Lucas's. They were dead eyes, flat and devoid of panic or surprise, even as they registered that the bed was empty of everything but a bunching of pillows arranged to mimic a sleeping form. Lucas wasn't in the bed. He was pressed into the narrow, shadowed alcove behind the door, balancing precariously on his good leg, the fractured bones in his left leg screaming a high, white-hot note of agony that threatened to black out his vision. He bit the inside of his cheek, using the sharp copper taste of blood to ground himself. The assassin took a step toward the bed, reaching into the pocket of his scrubs. He pulled out a syringe, the plunger already drawn back, filled not with medicine, but with a clear liquid that Lucas knew would stop a heart within seconds. Potassium chloride, or maybe just a massive bubble of air to cause an embolism. It would look like a heart attack brought on by trauma. Clean, professional, no loose ends. Lucas didn't wait for the man to reach the pillows. He couldn't. His strength was fading fast, drained by the blood loss and the painkillers that were trying to drag him under. He pushed off the wall, putting everything he had into a downward swing of the 4-pole. The heavy base of the stand, a 4-pronged claw of solid steel casters, swung through the air like a medieval mace. Connected, the blow caught the assassin across the shoulder and the side of the neck. It was a sickening crunch, the sound of collarbone giving way under blunt force. The assassin grunted, a sharp exhalation of air, and staggered sideways, crashing into the rolling tray table. Plastic cups and the water pitcher exploded, sending a spray of ice and water across the room. "You missed?" Lucas snarled, the adrenaline surging so hard his vision tunneled. He tried to follow up to bring the pole down again, but his injured leg buckled. The cast slipped on the wet floor, and Lucas went down hard, his knee slamming into the unforgiving tile. The pain was blinding, an electric shock that paralyzed him for a crucial second. The assassin didn't panic. He didn't scream or try to run. He simply absorbed the damage, rolling with the impact and pivoting on his heel. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, the shoulder shattered, but his right hand still held the syringe. He looked at Lucas, sprawled on the floor, tangled in the 4 lines, with the dispassionate focus of a butcher dealing with a struggling animal. "Mr. Vane sends his regards," the man whispered, his voice muffled by the mask, calm and terrifyingly polite. He lunged. Lucas kicked out with his good leg, catching the man in the shin, but the assassin was heavy, built like a tank under the scrubs. He absorbed the kick and dropped his weight onto Lucas's chest, pinning him to the cold, wet floor. The air left Lucas's lungs in a rush. He thrashed, clawing at the man's face, ripping the mask away to reveal a scar running from lip to chin, but the man didn't flinch. He pressed his forearm against Lucas's throat, crushing the windpipe, cutting off the supply of oxygen. Lucas gasped, choking, his hands scrabbling at the arm that was killing him. Black spots danced in his vision. The assassin raised the syringe, positioning it over the foreport still taped to the crook of Lucas's arm. He wasn't going to stab him. He was going to inject it directly into the line. "Don't fight," the assassin murmured, leaning his weight down, his knee digging into Lucas's broken leg. Lucas screamed, a strangled sound that died in his crushed throat. "It's just sleep, Captain. Just sleep." The needle tip hovered over the port. The room began to spin. Lucas felt his strength evaporating. The fire he had carried out of the woods, the rage that had driven him through the tunnel, was flickering out. He was going to die here, on a wet floor, smelling of antiseptic and fear, while the men who burned the world toasted champagne in a penthouse. No, the thought wasn't a word. It was a primal rejection of the ending. Lucas let go of the man's arm and reached blindly to the side. His fingers brushed against a shard of the broken water pitcher, thick, jagged industrial glass. He gripped it, ignoring the way it sliced into his own palm, and drove it upward with the last ounce of violence he possessed. He didn't aim. He just struck. The shard buried itself in the assassin's thigh, deep into the quadriceps. The man roared, the first sound of genuine pain he had made. The syringe flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. He reared back, his grip on Lucas's throat loosening for a fraction of a second. Lucas sucked in a desperate, wheezing breath. He bucked his hips, throwing the man off balance, but the assassin was relentless. He recovered instantly, his eyes narrowing with lethal intent. He reached for his waistband, abandoning the subtle approach. He pulled a knife, a serrated tactical blade that caught the fluorescent light. "Messy it is," the assassin growled. He raised the knife. Lucas had nothing left. His arms were lead. He stared at the blade, watching it reach the apex of its arc beam. The door to the hospital room didn't open. It disintegrated. The heavy magnetic lock shattered under the force of a ballistic kick that sent the wood flying inward on its hinges. The assassin flinched, turning his head. Agent Elena Rostova stood in the doorway, her weapon drawn, a Glock 19 held in a two-handed combat grip. She didn't shout a warning. She didn't ask him to freeze. She saw the knife. She saw Lucas on the floor. She fired. Crack, crack. 2 shots, deafening in the confined space. The assassin jerked violently as the rounds impacted his chest, catching him in the body armor he wore under the scrubs. He stumbled back. The wind knocked out of him, but he didn't go down. He was wearing Kevlar. He turned toward Rostova, raising the knife to throw, but he never got the chance. Behind Rostova, A mountain of a man in a yellow wildland firefighter shirt surged into the room. It was Jimmy, the rookie from Crew 7. His face streaked with tears and soot, his eyes wide with rage. He didn't have a gun. He didn't need one. He hit the assassin like a linebacker, a tackle fueled by the raw, hysterical strength of seeing his captain on the floor. "Get off him!" Jimmy screamed. They crashed into the far wall, shattering the television screen. The assassin was fast, but Jimmy was 240 pounds of corn-fed Oregon muscle who spent his summers swinging axes. Miller, the crew boss, was right behind him, diving into the fray. They weren't fighting with technique. They were swarming him. Miller grabbed the knife hand, twisting the wrist until the bone snapped with a wet pop. Jimmy had the man in a headlock, squeezing with enough pressure to crush a melon. Rostova holstered her weapon and moved, stepping over the debris to get to Lucas. She knelt beside him, her hands checking his neck for a pulse, her face pale. "Lucas? Lucas, look at me." Lucas coughed, rolling onto his side, retching dryly as air flooded back into his lungs. I stuck him," he wheezed, pointing a trembling finger at the assassin, who was now unconscious, pinned to the floor by two very angry firefighters. "Leg." Rostova looked at the assassin, then back at Lucas, a grim smile touching her lips. "Yeah, you stuck him good." She looked up at Miller. "Zip ties. Now, before he wakes up." Miller pulled a bundle of heavy-duty flex cuffs from his pocket, standard gear for securing gear, now repurposed for securing a hitman. He trussed the assassin's hands and feet behind his back, tightening them until the plastic bit into the skin. "Is he dead?" Jimmy asked, breathing hard, his knuckles bruised. "He's wearing a vest," Rostova said, standing up and pulling her radio. "He'll live, which is good because I have about 1,000 questions for him." She keyed her mic. "Dispatch, this is Agent Rostova. Officer down, correction, suspect down in room 304. I need a secure containment team and immediate extraction. Code red. We are compromised." She looked down at Lucas. "You okay to move, Captain?" Lucas tried to sit up, but the room tilted dangerously. His leg was a pulsing entity of pain. "Do I have a choice?" "No," Rostova said. "Vane knows you're here. This guy was just the first wave. If we stay, the next one won't be a man with a needle. It'll be a gas leak or a structural failure. We have to go." "Where?" Lucas gritted out as Jimmy and Miller lifted him. They were gentle, but every movement sent shockwaves through his body. "Somewhere off the grid," Rostova said. She moved to the window, peering through the blinds. "My team is 5 minutes out, but we can't wait. We're taking the service elevator." They moved as a unit. Jimmy carried Lucas, his massive arms cradling the captain like a child. Miller took point, grabbing the assassin's fallen knife. Rostova took the rear, her gun sweeping the hallway. The hospital corridor was chaos. Nurses screaming, patients looking out of doors. But Rostova flashed her badge and barked orders that parted the sea of confusion. "FBI, clear the hall. Everyone back in your rooms." They reached the service elevator at the end of the wing. Rostova swiped a keycard she had likely lifted from the nurse's station or hacked. The doors slid open, revealing a startled janitor with a mop bucket. "Out," Rostova said. The janitor didn't argue. He abandoned his bucket and fled. As the doors closed, sealing them in the metal box, the silence returned, but this time it was the silence of adrenaline dumping. Jimmy was shaking. Miller was staring at the blood on his hands, the assassin's blood. "You guys," Lucas whispered, his head resting against Jimmy's shoulder. "You shouldn't be here. You'll lose your pensions." "Screw the pension, Cap," Jimmy said, his voice cracking. "We saw the news. We saw what you did. You think we were gonna let you sit here and get whacked by some corporate stooge?" Miller looked at Lucas, his expression hard. "The forest is gone, Luke. 5,000 acres. You're the only thing left. We protect our own." The elevator dinged at the basement level, the morgue and loading dock. "Listen to me," Rostova said, checking the magazine of her Glock. "When these doors open, we move fast. My vehicle is an unmarked van parked in the loading bay. Black Ford Transit. Miller, you drive. Jimmy, keep the captain down. I'll cover our 6. Who is coming for us? Lucas asked. Everyone, Rostova said darkly. Vane has deep pockets. He has mercenaries, he has dirty cops, and he has lawyers. But we have something they don't. What's that? We have the hard drive, Rostova said, tapping the pocket of her windbreaker. While you were sleeping, I had a tech pull the cloud data from the drone serial number you gave me. It was encrypted, but we cracked it. Lucas's eyes widened. You have the footage? We have everything, she said. We have high-definition video of them planting the devices. We have audio of the order to burn. We even have a biometric log of the operator. Then why are we running? Miller asked. If you have the proof, arrest Vane. Because proof disappears, Rostova said, the elevator slowing to a stop. Judges get paid off. Evidence gets lost in custody. Files get corrupted. Until I get this data to a secure server in Quantico and put a hard copy in front of the Attorney General myself, it doesn't exist. Vane knows that. He's not trying to win in court anymore. He's trying to erase the board. The doors opened. The loading dock was dimly lit, smelling of diesel and garbage. The black van was there idling. But standing between them and the van were 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies. They weren't looking at the van. They were looking at the elevator doors, hands resting on their holsters. They saw Rostova. They saw the gun. Federal agent, Rostova shouted, stepping out, weapon raised. Hands where I can see them. The deputies hesitated. They looked at each other. These were men who had taken a bribe to look the other way, not men who had signed up for a shootout with the FBI. Don't do it, Rostova warned, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. You walk away now, you might just lose your badges. You draw those weapons, you lose your lives. And for what? Robert Vane? The tension stretched, thin and brittle. Lucas watched from the elevator, his heart hammering. If they started shooting, Jimmy would be caught in the crossfire. One of the deputies slowly raised his hands. We're just securing the perimeter, ma'am. Walk away, Rostova commanded. North exit. Don't look back. The deputies backed away, turning and disappearing into the night. They were bullies, not soldiers. Go, go, go. Rostova signaled. They sprinted for the van. The side door slid open. Jimmy laid Lucas gently on the floor of the van, which had been stripped of seats and lined with surveillance gear. Miller jumped into the driver's seat. Rostova dove in the back, sliding the door shut just as tires squealed at the top of the ramp. A black SUV, the twin of the ones from the forest, tore down the incline, high beams blinding. Drive, Rostova yelled. Miller stomped on the gas. The van lurched forward, engine roaring. They smashed through the wooden arm of the parking gate, splintering it into kindling. The SUV was right behind them, closing fast. Jimmy, hold the captain, Rostova shouted. She moved to the rear doors, unlatched them and kicked them open. The wind rushed in, chaotic and loud. She braced herself against the frame, aiming her weapon at the pursuing vehicle. She didn't shoot the driver. She shot the radiator. 3 rounds. Ping, ping, ping. Steam exploded from the front of the SUV. The vehicle swerved, blinded by the white cloud, and slammed into a concrete pillar with a bone-jarring crunch. Rostova pulled the doors shut and locked them. She slumped against the wall of the van, exhaling a long, shaky breath. That, she said, holstering her gun, is how we handle jurisdiction disputes. Lucas lay on the floor, looking up at the metal roof of the van. The pain in his leg was a dull roar now, masked by the sheer impossibility of being alive. He looked at Jimmy, who was grinning like a maniac, and at Rostova, who was already on her encrypted laptop, typing furiously. Where are we going? Lucas asked again. Rostova didn't look up. There's an old fire lookout tower on Mount Hood. It's decommissioned, off the grid, and accessible only by a logging road that isn't on the GPS. It's the last place they'll look for a cripple. And then what? Then, Rostova said, hitting a key with finality. We edit the movie. I have the raw footage, but we need to package it. We need to link the money to the order. And we need to do it before Vane leaves the country. My sources say his private jet is fueled and filed for a flight to the Caymans at 0600 tomorrow. He's running, Lucas said. He's relocating, Rostova corrected. If he gets to non-extradition soil, he wins. He'll pay a fine, maybe lose the company, but he'll be drinking mojitos while Blackwood turns into condos. Lucas forced himself up on one elbow. We can't let him leave. We won't, Rostova said, turning the laptop screen toward him. It showed a flight plan. But we can't stop him at the airport. He owns the airport security. We have to stop him before he gets there. How? Lucas looked at his crew, Miller driving with white-knuckled intensity, Jimmy checking the first aid kit. He looked at the federal agent who had gone rogue to save him. He started a fire, Lucas said, his eyes dark and hard as flint. We're going to give him a burn-over. The van sped into the night, leaving the city lights behind, climbing toward the mountains where the air was thin and cold, and where the only law was survival. The Oregon dawn did not break. It bruised the sky. A heavy, suffocating mist clung to the slopes of Mount Hood, turning the world into a grayscale wash of damp pines and wet asphalt. Inside the battered black Ford Transit, the air was thick with the smell of stale adrenaline, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of gun oil. Miller drove with a terrifying, silent focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel as the van tore down the logging switchbacks, the suspension groaning with every pothole. Captain Lucas Thorne lay on the floor in the back, his fractured leg elevated on a coil of rope. The pain had moved beyond sharp agony into a dull, thumping bass line that vibrated through his entire skeleton. He stared at the ceiling of the van, watching the shadows of passing trees flicker like old film reels. Beside him, Agent Elena Rostova was illuminated by the harsh blue glow of her laptop screen, her fingers flying across the keys as she tracked a blinking red on a digital map. He's moving, Rostova announced, her voice tight. Vane's convoy just passed the perimeter gate of the private airfield. 3 vehicles, 2 security SUVs and a limousine. His jet has filed a flight plan for Teterboro, then Grand Cayman. Engines are already spooling. How far out are we? Lucas asked, gritting his teeth as the van lurched around a hairpin turn. 6 miles, Miller shouted from the front. But the road is washed out near the creek. We're losing time. We won't catch them on the tarmac, Rostova said, slamming the laptop shut. If that bird gets in the air, he's gone. He'll be drinking scotch in international airspace before I can even get a judge on the phone. Lucas pulled himself up, wincing. He looked out the rear window at the fog-choked forest. He knew this mountain. He knew every drainage ditch, every ridge, and every airflow pattern. He closed his eyes, visualizing the terrain not as a map, but as a fuel load. Vane was water, flowing toward the path of least resistance. To stop him, they didn't need speed. They needed a fire break. They needed to cut the fuel. The airfield, Lucas rasped. It's the old Mackenzie strip, right? The one the drug runners used in the 80s? Yeah, Jimmy nodded, checking the load on a flare gun. South face of the ridge. There's only one access road that can handle a limousine, Lucas said, his mind sharpening, pushing the pain into a box. It crosses the timber bridge over Blind Man's Gorge. If they're moving heavy, they have to slow down there. The turn is too tight. We can't beat them to the bridge, Rostova argued, checking her watch. They're closer. We don't need to beat them, Lucas said. We need to herd them. Miller, don't take the road. Take the fire trail. The cut. Miller looked in the rearview mirror, his eyes wide. The cut? Cap, that's a 40% grade. In this van, we'll roll it. We won't roll it, Lucas lied, though he knew the odds were 50-50. It cuts 3 miles off the trip. We drop in right behind them. We pinch them against the gate. Rostova looked at Lucas, then at Miller. She saw the shared look between the firefighters. A reckless, calculated insanity that only people who walked into burning buildings possessed. She holstered her weapon and grabbed the grab handle above the door. "Do it," she said. Miller wrenched the wheel hard to the left. The van left the gravel road and plunged into the undergrowth. Branches whipped against the windshield, screeching like banshees. The vehicle bucked and slid, tires fighting for purchase in the wet mud. Gravity took over, pulling them down the steep incline of the fire break. A narrow scar in the forest cleared for bulldozer access years ago. It was a controlled crash. Lucas held onto the cargo straps, his body slamming against the floor. Jimmy braced his feet against the wheel well, shielding Lucas's bad leg with his own body. The world outside was a blur of green and gray. They were falling down the mountain, sliding through the mud, careening toward the valley floor. "Bridge is coming up," Miller screamed. "Brace for impact." The van burst out of the tree line, skidding sideways onto the paved access road. Miller slammed on the brakes, sending the van into a 180-degree spin. The tires smoked, screaming in protest, before the vehicle slammed to a halt, blocking the road perfectly. 30 yards ahead, the taillights of the convoy were just fading into the fog as they crossed the wooden bridge. They had missed the intercept by seconds. "Damn it," Rostova yelled, kicking the door open. "No," Lucas said, struggling to sit up. "Look," he pointed through the shattered windshield. The convoy had stopped. The lead SUV was idling at the airfield gate, which was currently closed. A guard was coming out of the booth, moving slowly, likely checking IDs. Vane's arrogance was his undoing. He assumed he was safe on his own land. He hadn't expected a lightning strike from the rear. "Jimmy," Lucas commanded. "The flare." Jimmy didn't hesitate. He rolled down the window, aimed the flare gun at the sky, and pulled the trigger. A sphere of magnesium red streaked upward, disappearing into the low clouds before bursting in a brilliant, blinding shower of crimson light. It wasn't a distress signal. It was a declaration of war. The security detail in the rear SUV saw the flare. They saw the battered black van blocking their retreat. Doors flew open. Men in tactical gear spilled out, raising rifles, suppressing fire. Rostova shouted, dropping to a knee behind the van's engine block. She opened fire with her Glock, the sharp cracks echoing off the canyon walls. She wasn't aiming to kill. She was aiming to keep their heads down. Bullets pinged off the van's chassis. Glass shattered. "Miller, get the captain out," Rostova ordered. "Jimmy, flank them through the ditch." "I'm not sitting this out," Lucas growled. He grabbed a heavy Pulaski axe from the pile of gear in the back. A tool of his trade, half axe, half hoe, designed to cut through roots and soil, felt heavy and right in his hands. He tumbled out of the side door, landing on his good leg, using the axe as a crutch. The pain was blinding, a white noise that drowned out the gunfire. He dragged himself toward the ditch, moving through the tall, wet grass. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew how to move in a kill zone. You stay low. You stay cool. Ahead, the gate was opening. The limousine began to move, desperate to reach the sanctuary of the runway where the Gulfstream jet sat waiting, its turbines whining, a silver bird of prey ready to flee. "He's running," Jimmy shouted from the other side of the road. Lucas saw the layout. The bridge was a choke point. The limousine was heavy, armored. It was trapped between the opening gate and the rear guard. "Burn the fuel," Lucas whispered to himself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the radio he had taken from the mercenary in the woods. He keyed the mic, broadcasting on the frequency the security team was using. "This is Captain Lucas Thorne." His voice boomed through the earpieces of every mercenary on the bridge. "The bridge is rigged. You have 5 seconds to clear the deck before I blow the supports." It was a bluff. He had no explosives. But these men had seen him survive a firestorm. They had seen him crash a truck into City Hall. In their minds, he was a myth, a demon of ash and rage. Fear did the rest. The mercenaries on the bridge hesitated. The driver of the rear SUV panicked and threw the vehicle into reverse, slamming into the limousine's bumper. Chaos ensued. "It's a lie," Robert Vane's voice crackled over the radio, high-pitched and hysterical. "Kill him. He's unarmed. He's a cripple." But the seed of doubt was planted. The security team broke formation, seeking cover away from the bridge supports. Lucas used the confusion. He broke cover, limping onto the asphalt. He didn't have a gun. He stood there, silhouetted by the headlights of the van, leaning on his axe like an ancient warrior. "Vane!" Lucas roared. "It's over." The rear door of the limousine opened. Robert Vane stumbled out. He wasn't the composed tycoon from the press conference. His suit was rumpled, his tie loose. He held a silver-plated pistol in his shaking hand. "You ruin everything," Vane screamed, raising the gun. "It was just trees. It was just dirt. I bought it. It was mine. It never belonged to you," Lucas said calmly. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. Vane cocked the hammer. "I'll buy the judge. I'll buy the jury. And I'll buy the man who buries you." Whoop whoop. The sound didn't come from the ground. Came from the sky. The heavy thrum of rotors beat down the mist. Powerful searchlights cut through the gloom, blinding Vane, pinning him to the asphalt like a bug under a magnifying glass. "Federal agents." A voice amplified by a loudspeaker boomed from above. "Drop the weapon. Now." 2 FBI Blackhawk helicopters flared over the bridge. Their side doors open, snipers trained on Vane. Behind the van, lights flashed, blue and red, flashing endlessly. The Oregon State Police, the real ones, led by a convoy of federal SUVs. Rostova stood up from behind the van, holstering her weapon. She looked at Lucas and winked. "Took them long enough." Vane looked at the sky, then at the police and finally at Lucas. The gun in his hand wavered. He looked at the jet, so close, yet an ocean away. He realized, with the crushing weight of reality, that his money had finally run out. He dropped the gun, clattered on the bridge. Vane fell to his knees, sobbing. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the tantrum of a child who had been told no for the first time in his life. Agents swarmed the bridge. Vane was cuffed, dragged to his feet, and shoved into the back of a black SUV. As the car passed Lucas, Vane pressed his face against the glass, his eyes hollow. Lucas didn't look away. He watched the man disappear, not with triumph, but with a deep, exhausting sense of finality. The adrenaline finally left Lucas's body. The pain came rushing back, a tidal wave that buckled his knees. He began to fall. Jimmy and Miller were there instantly, catching him before he hit the ground. "We got you, Cap," Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion. "We got you." Rostova walked over. She looked at the axe in Lucas's hand, then gently pried his fingers loose. She took the tool and handed it to Miller. "You're under arrest, Lucas," she said softly. Lucas looked up at her, confused. "Technically," she smiled, tears shining in her eyes, "for being the stubbornest son of a bitch I've ever met. But I think the charges will be dropped." She reached out and squeezed his shoulder. "Medics are inbound. Rest now, firefighter. The fire is out." Lucas closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he couldn't smell smoke. He could only smell the rain. 6 months later, the scars on the land were still visible, black streaks running through the valley like ink on parchment. But the green was returning. It started low, ferns and moss reclaiming the ash, followed by the fireweed, bright, defiant purple flowers that only bloomed after a burn. Lucas Thorne walked slowly along the new trail. He walked with a cane now, a simple hickory stick he had carved himself. His limp was permanent, a hitch in his step that served as a reminder of the night the world burned. He wasn't wearing his yellow shirt anymore. He wore a flannel jacket and a Forest Service cap. He wasn't a hotshot captain anymore. The medical board had retired him with full honors. He couldn't jump out of helicopters or dig lines on a 40% grade. But he wasn't gone. He was the new warden of the Blackwood Restoration Project. He stopped at the base of the great oak, the tree where he had found the device, the tree that had almost killed him. It had fallen, its massive trunk lying on the forest floor, already beginning the slow process of decaying into nurse logs that would feed the next generation of redwoods. "You look good, Lucas." He turned. Elena Rostova stood on the trail behind him. She wasn't wearing her FBI windbreaker. She wore a wool coat and a scarf. She looked softer, less like a weapon, more like a person. "Agent?" Lucas nodded, leaning on his cane. "Or is it Special Agent in charge now?" "It is," she smiled, walking up to stand beside him. Vane got life without parole. RICO statutes, domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit murder. His assets were seized. The settlement money is paying for all of this. She gestured to the seedlings being planted by volunteers in the distance. "And Sterling, resigned in disgrace, currently negotiating a plea deal that involves a lot of jail time." Lucas looked back at the fallen tree. "Justice is slow, but it grows," Rostova said. "Like the trees." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metallic object. It was a melted piece of titanium, a fragment of the Vane device. She handed it to him. "I thought you might want this, as a souvenir." Lucas took it. It was cold, heavy. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he wound up and threw it as hard as he could into the deep ravine. They watched it disappear into the canopy. "I don't need souvenirs," Lucas said. "I have the knee." Rostova laughed, a genuine, warm sound that seemed to frighten a nearby jay. "So what now, Warden? You gonna spend the rest of your life watching grass grow?" "Someone has to watch it," Lucas said. "Make sure it grows right." He looked at her. "What about you? Back to DC?" "Maybe," she said, looking out over the valley. "Or maybe I requested a transfer to the Portland field office. Turns out I like the rain." A comfortable silence settled between them. The sky above was a brilliant, piercing blue, the kind that only comes after a storm has scrubbed the air clean. "Jimmy and Miller are bringing the crew up later," Lucas said. "We're going to plant a grove for the ones we lost in the Yarnell fire. You want to help?" Rostova looked at him, her eyes searching his face. She saw the lines of pain, the gray in his beard, but she also saw the peace that had settled in his soul. "I've never planted a tree," she admitted. "It's easy," Lucas said, turning back toward the path, the sound of his cane tapping a steady rhythm against the earth. "Dig a hole, put the roots in, cover it up, and wait." He offered her his arm. She took it. Together, they walked down the trail, two survivors in a healing world, leaving the ashes behind them, stepping into the green.